it's Sarah from Empowered Mothers Network. This is podcast episode 29, and this podcast episode is called What No One Tells You About Motherhood That Changes Everything. So stay tuned for this episode. So I think most of us would agree that to some extent or another, motherhood is, it's like a wonderful thing. It can be a beautiful thing. It can also be a very hard thing. And if we're being honest, motherhood is probably nothing like we expected it to be. The reality of motherhood compared to what we expected before we had kids, even, if we had quite a good idea of what that involved before hand, it still kind of comes out nothing like we expected. And there's one thing that nobody really tells you about motherhood as well. And I think once you understand that, it kind of changes everything. So there's this idealized version of motherhood that we have in our society and in our culture, and the kind of the difference between that, where that idealistic view of motherhood and what the real experience is, there is quite a gap there. We all kind of pick up on that gap, and that is when we pick up on that gap is where we get these feelings creeping in, or these negative thoughts, or get stuck in thought patterns where, we perhaps we're telling ourselves we're not a good mother, or we're doing it wrong, or they'd be better off with somebody else, or all these kind of thoughts creep in because of that gap, because there's that kind of resistance between how we are as a mother and where we're at, and what we think is expected of us. And this episode is about one major mindset shift that we can make, that can kind of transform how we experience motherhood, especially if we're feeling really stuck in it at the moment. And I know that often happens with young children, but if we're feeling really stuck or isolated, or just feelings of low self-worth and not feeling good about ourselves. So we're going to discuss that in this episode and more, so please stay tuned. If you haven't already, please like and subscribe if you're watching this on YouTube, or you can check out the audio version on all major Spotify, Apple Music, all that. Okay, what's the biggest myth about motherhood? Actually, if you know what the biggest myth about motherhood is that you've been told, then please let me know in the comments below, because I'd love to kind of know a bit more about other people's myths and whatnot, and what we kind of believe or we've been sold as the truth on motherhood. But I think society always tells us, that good mothers should be, always be selfless, and put their children first, like all the time, and also feel kind of naturally fulfilled just by motherhood. So for me, on a personal note, I chose purposely, going forwards with Empowered Mothers Network, not to really focus on parenting content. I didn't want it to be like this is how you should do such and such when raising your children, because I honestly believe that there is not a one size fits all model of parenting, and there's so much stuff out there now that we have to navigate. And for me, I didn't want to get Empowered Mothers Network drawn into that argument of parent-centered parenting versus child-centered parenting and all that stuff. I just think there is too much shit out there that everybody wants you to subscribe to in terms of parenting advice, and it's just a noise, it's just distracting, and it just makes most of us feel inferior in some way, because you can never really live up to that all the time. It's not always clear from things that you see on the internet, magazines you read or whatnot, that there's some great ideas, and we can take that and incorporate it into our own motherhood and parenting journey, and that's fine. But then it gets too far the other way, I think, and then it becomes almost like a prescription. And even if you find yourself maybe in a community that follow that prescription, and there can soon be keyboard arguments and whatnot, and a lot of bitchiness and backstabbing and judgments and just, no, thank you, okay, we don't need this anymore. So all of this kind of expectation we see through society, through culture, it's creating that gap, as I spoke about earlier. And I think as well it can lead to burnout, because mums are thinking that they, have to do everything. There's this thing now, especially, of having to take your kids to all these activities, after school things, experiences, days out. We are, as a culture now, we are so obsessive with, it's almost like we can't let our kids be bored anymore and just let them idle and just, it's difficult sometimes as a parent to see them in that state where they are bored and you want to do something, but sometimes they need it. And yeah, we seem to be pressured by like society and culture now just to really, there's that, I've talked about this in other podcast episodes, but this element of like productivity and always having to do, and we are running so fast and getting burnt out. And we are getting burnt out because the expectations are totally shite compared to what we can actually do as a person. So we feel like we have to give everything, and then because we're so busy giving, we have no time to replenish ourselves. And then the times that we do maybe try and do that, we end up feeling guilty. So yeah, that's the next point, guilt. Like any kind of desire that we might have for personal growth, or for pursuing hobbies, or for continuing or to pursue a new career. Anything outside of motherhood brings in the guilt, because we feel somewhere like we're like neglecting our motherhood duties or something. It's, you're damned if you do and you're damned if you don't. I know mums who stay at home who feel guilty that they should be contributing financially to the household, and I know mums who go out to work but feel guilty because they're not there as much to see the kids and support the kids. So we all feel, basically, to some degree, whatever our situation, all of us feel in some way guilty, or like we're doing the wrong thing, or questioning ourselves. And all of this mental guff from society is essentially disconnecting mums from their own identity and their own purpose, which, includes being a mother, sure, but isn't necessarily the whole purpose of our existence. So what is the truth that they don't really talk about? You get pregnant and then you go to your antenatal classes, and there's very much focus on the practical aspects of how to look after a child, which is fine, but nobody really so much talks about the truth of the matter, that motherhood is not just about raising a child or raising children. It's also kind of about raising yourself, and refining yourself and reconnecting with yourself in your kind of shifted or new role. And it's not so cut and paste either. It's not like one day we're not a mum and then we give birth and then there we are, you're a mother, off you go. It's more like a journey, and we kind of grow and evolve and transform throughout the journey. And there's quite a few transitions in the journey as well. It's not just as cut and paste as non-mum mum. We've got transitions. A few examples of transitions are like going from one child to 2 or 3 more children, losing children, miscarriage, dealing with maybe either having to care for elderly parents whilst we have young children or youngish children, or dealing with the death of loved ones, parents, whatnot. Or career changes, massive career upheavals where, the whole family might need to be relocated. There's so many different, transitions, menopause as well, once you get maybe a little bit further into your journey. So there's all these sort of transitions, and we're just growing all the time. And so it's not so linear. And yeah, nobody really discusses this so much. And it's very focused out there on there's all this argument going on about how to raise the child, instead of, also allowing in that processing space for who you are becoming and how you are evolving. So motherhood is not about losing yourself, it's also about discovering these new parts of yourself. So the mindset for most of us as we start out in motherhood is, again, that one of, am I doing enough for my kids? Which is, I think, why we all try and do as many activities and entertain them, and it's very child-centric, which is not a bad thing. And I'm not talking about like parenting models here again per se, but shifting from that mindset of, am I doing enough for my kids, to how is motherhood changing and how am I growing in motherhood? And I think a lot of us have avoided this kind of mindset shift because, we're taught, or we have the opinion, or from everything that's happened before, that kind of shift back to ourselves seems selfish. A lot of mums will say that if they kind of shift that focus away from their children back to themselves, it feels like they're being selfish. But I think when we focus on ourselves, not in a kind of narcissistic way, but when we allow our own sense of identity to have a seat at the table, and when we allow our own personal growth and evolvement of our journey to have a seat at the table, and we actively pay attention to that and give energy to that, then that can help us to kind of, it filters down basically to our children. They see everything that we do. They see how we treat ourselves, how we speak to ourselves, even if they don't hear the critical voice in our head, they pick up so much. And I think if you have this kind of mindset shift from, am I doing enough for my kids, to how am I growing in motherhood, how is motherhood changing me, it kind of releases that pressure to be this perfect, textbook parent. It helps you embrace challenges as part of your own transformation, and resilience is something that's really, really useful in motherhood, and I've talked about that in this podcast episode, resilience. And it also helps you find joy and meaning, I think, beyond just like the tasks of motherhood, and that can be something really difficult to do in the early days when you've got really young children and it's very monotonous and repetitive kind of tasks that you have to do. So we talked about rest as well in the podcast before last, I think it was, but I think we talked about that in there, about the feeling of guilt when we need rest basically. But rather than feeling guilty when we need rest, we can take this kind of mindset shift and recognise that teaching our children about balance is part of being a good mum. Instead of stressing over doing more stuff, whatever it is that we are conditioned to kind of be doing, recognising that being in the present moment and being engaged with our children as well is more impactful than ticking off the to-do lists, which might look like taking them to all the activities and making sure that they've got to the after school clubs and whatnot. They might just a bit of one-on-one time sometimes can be a lot more fulfilling for everybody, really. And I think I've mentioned before in a previous podcast as well, and I definitely have on one of the blog posts on the website, but about sometimes how you can get so lost in motherhood, especially when your sense of self and identity shifts so dramatically, that some mothers will just get so lost in it that they don't sort of manage to find their way back out again, and their entire role in life just becomes solely mother, and there's nothing, it's like this sense of self erodes and they have no way of getting it back, and they kind of wander lost I guess you could say, but never really reconnecting with this person that they're becoming, and wondering lost as just a mother in life. So we have to be aware, I think, and sometimes we're not aware of this. Sometimes we do kind of wander in this almost like other lands of being solely entrenched in motherhood and not being able to break out of that. We do wonder that for years sometimes, and it will take some women years to kind of be aware of what's happened and start to piece together who they are now and start to come out into the wider world again. So yeah, essentially our children are growing and so are we. And yeah, next time you feel like the guilt creeping, because the guilt is a big one, or overwhelmed, or just generally like I've not done enough today, or I'm not doing enough, then if you can kind of be aware of when these little thoughts come up, or those feelings, and just take a step back and say, what is this teaching me? Then that's like the first step in like awareness and observation, and then from there we can start to be aware of when this is coming up for us, and maybe start to question it a little bit, and then start to take steps in changing that. So yeah, as well as myths you've heard about motherhood in the comments, I would also love to know how you feel like motherhood has changed you. How has it changed you in ways you never expected? I think a practical one for me as well, because it's not just like literally my brain has changed, because it does when you're pregnant. The neuroplasticity of your brain increases, and things that maybe used to be important to you are now, in your new role as a mother, not so important, and those connections just start to fizzle out and other things take in. And I found since I've become a mother, my brain has definitely changed. I think about things differently. I know I'm more like anxious in situations where I wouldn't have been before I had kids. I'm definitely more aware of potential dangers and hazards and things around me in day-to-day life that I probably wasn't either as aware of before, or so bothered about, or so fearful. There's an element of fear comes up, I think, as well, with that kind of protective element. So yeah, let me know how motherhood has changed things for you, maybe in unexpected ways, unexpected shifts that you didn't think would ever have occurred before having kids. Also, if you think of a mum that needs to hear this episode, then give the episode a share. Please subscribe to the journal if you haven't already, because that is where we are sharing events, we are sharing spotlights as well on local mums, and all the stuff that's kind of going on with Empowered Mothers Network is in the fortnightly journal, so you can sign up to that like on the website or through Instagram and Facebook and whatnot. So I hope you enjoyed this episode. If you've got any more suggestions for upcoming episodes that you'd like to hear about, or perhaps you are someone who works in a section of a role perhaps where you can help other mums, and you maybe want to have a chat about something particular on the podcast, then please get in touch. You can get in touch via the website empoweredmothersnetwork.com. Otherwise, I will see you for the next episode.